So do you think you?
Okay, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me well, or do I need to project?
That's
good. Okay, wonderful. Well, good afternoon to you all. As you can see, I will be focusing my presentation on digital twins today, and now I'm acutely aware that I'm probably going to be doing so at the risk of earning Professor Blair's absolute despair or disdain. I will look at some more examples of digital twins, and try and look at the potential that they hold, especially when it comes to addressing environmental challenges. And as well, I will be looking at some risks as well. I will then situate the use of those tools like DTs within the context of the legal profession, which I think is perhaps something that you weren't expecting. And in particular, I'm going to look at it in the context of the evolution of the legal profession, which is something that I have been particularly working on in the last few years. So as some of the prior panelists described, DTs are dynamic, they're data-driven, virtual replicas of physical and biological entities that continuously collect, process, and analyze real-time data. Now, they can offer us some very deep insights on the functioning of real-world objects and enable predictions about the behavior of those simulated systems. And they will do so over different timescales, under different conditions, and also within various constraints. Importantly, they can also offer us insights that we may not even be looking for, which is something that's very important. These insights are particularly prescient for our environmental and sustainability challenges. Now, the challenges that have been raised by our previous panelists. Okay. All right. The challenges that have been raised by our previous panelists are all very real. That doesn't prevent us, I hope, from also looking at DT's potential, especially when it is based on trusted contextual data. And what are some foreseeable opportunities for DTs in the environmental space? So you can have a look. I use the icons to make it easier, but in the energy space, DTs can simulate and direct energy production by various energy sources, including renewable energies. And this way we can plan for smarter and stable energy infrastructure. DTs can also predict energy consumptive behavior, and in doing so, recommend us perhaps energy efficiency measures. If we're looking at the transport industry, DTs can possibly help us design safer and more fuel-efficient cars. And in the context of urban environments, you can see DTs can support things like monitoring noise pollution, other types of air pollution, but also heat levels, for instance. We can look at improving traffic planning, making waste and wastewater management more efficient as well. When preparing for disaster resilience, DTs can allow us to stress test and look at real-time responses to anything that might shock the system, like extreme disasters, a volcanic eruption, and a tornado. So DTs also allow experimenting with nature-based solutions. And I think this is sort of what Dr. Blair spoke about in his hydro and ecology work. With a virtual laboratory, you can imagine you could run numerous what-if situations. This will allow us to perhaps identify optimal mitigation and adaptation strategies. In the US, conservationists have been embracing some of these possibilities, and in looking at DTs as a way to focus on urgent issues, such as invasive species and ecosystem restoration. This picture here is of Danger Mound Preserve, and it's at Point Conception in California. It's being now looked at by an NGO known as the Nature Conservancy, and they're using DT technology to help revitalize the area and particularly address some of the adverse impacts that it's been facing. The Nature Conservancy created a digital twin with the help of some folks there who are definitely computer scientists, and they created it off the Danger Mound Reserve, this beautiful landscape here. And the intention is to accelerate understanding of what the natural processes are occurring there. One example of where the DT has been incredibly helpful in terms of land and conservation management is that it has helped identify 300 acres of invasive species and devise strategies on how to eliminate them, but also how to check those results as well. DTs can thus help us maintain critical habitats, for example. It can also help us make important conservation decisions. This is particularly important given global biodiversity targets that we have today, right? We're working towards 30% by 2030, protecting our lands and waters. These kinds of technology might help us get us there faster. But of course, why would we want to stop at one ecosystem when you could look at a state, perhaps? So this is a digital doppelganger for an entire state. The CSIRO, which is a Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, a federal government agency in Australia, and they recently created a spatial digital twin for the state of New South Wales. And what they do is they model the New South Wales urban environment. And if you're wondering what was the impetus, why did they want to make this tool in the first place? Well, it was related to climate change disasters. Everyone remember those 2019, 2020 bushfires that killed like billions of species in Australia? Well, there was a report that was done following that. And one of the things that came out of that was the need for telecommunications and utility infrastructure to be better prepared. And so they needed more spatial data to inform them of when they're making the risk, when they're looking at those risks and identifying what kind of resilience mechanisms or measures that they need to take. Importantly, again, what you see is DT is intended to support improved decision-making, right? That is the intention, and that is the hope that we're working towards. And of course, why would you stop at a state when you could look at a country? So Singapore created the world's first digital replica of an entire country, or at least that is what they claim, and perhaps our colleagues will say, no, that's not true, but we'll see. So Singapore created this, what they claim is their first digital replica of an entire country. And why did this need come about? Again, this was led by Singapore's Land Authority, and it came out after, again, guess what? Natural disasters. So we had torrential rain that had been occurring in 2011, lots of flooding happening in Singapore. And that was combined with the issue of having very, limited and densely populated land to work with. And so what the DT, or the digital twin, is intended to do is generate terrain and obstacle maps to help make better use of Singapore's limited land space and to figure out the areas that are most at risk from flooding. So this tool has been shared across various government agencies within Singapore as well. And now they're also using it for decision-making when it comes to tree and green space management. So the country anticipates to then use it further, modeling how solar energy rollouts occur, 5G deployment works, disaster planning, evacuation, crowd control. All of this are possibilities that the country is looking to use the digital twin to help them. But why stop at a state when you can go to why stop at a country when you can go to the world? So this one perhaps you've heard about since it's in your backyard. Destiny, or Destination Earth, is the European Commission's flagship initiative to support the objectives of the twin transition. And this is what they're doing is building on that Green Deal as well as a digital strategy. And this model is intended to monitor, simulate, predict all the interactions between natural phenomenon and human activities. Whether it's doing that well is another question, but it's certainly that is the aim that they're doing for. Importantly, it's also meant to support EU policymaking and decision-making moving forward. It was officially launched just this past summer, so it's very new, it's very fresh, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of teething issues along the way. But there is a hope that this will help the region respond to climate and natural disasters, extreme weather events, and so forth. And also, they also will hope that this will then play into how socioeconomic policy might play out as well. Now, as is true of any digital twin, Destiny is expected to continuously evolve and develop. And so by 2030, we're expected that Destiny is supposed to have a full digital data set of the Earth. Okay. Now, there are a lot of obvious challenges that comes with this. I'm going to go with, okay, so utilizing DT well is not without its challenges, and some of them have already been raised by our prior panelists in the earlier session. There will be challenges that relate to, for instance, data privacy and security, data ownership and licensing, liability and risk management. So what happens when decisions are made on inaccurate data that was raised earlier, such as the truncation areas that you mentioned, right? IP issues, how is IP of digital twins going to be used? Any ethical and bias considerations that haven't been taken into account? Cross-border transfers, how are you doing international border transfers between different data protection laws? And of course, regulatory challenges, because we're going to see the space evolve. There's no regulation really at this point. So we're going to see a new landscape coming out here. But there are some challenges that relate specifically to the environmental and just transition space. Again, some of this was already highlighted. What do you notice about all the DT applications that I mentioned earlier? All the ones, those 4 ones that I said are the different states. They're all based in developed states, right? They're all based in developed countries. Why? Because if you think about it, DTs are very expensive, right? They require a lot of data. They require a lot of even just prerequisites for being able to collect that data, to manage that data, to go through it, computational capacities, and of course, any other enabling technologies that are needed to kind of translate that. This makes it very much an inaccessible tool for many developing countries that lack the funds to afford that kind of infrastructure, but just also lacks the digital infrastructure in the first place. So in essence, this tool should not be exclusive, right? That is the hope, but rather but it needs to be accessible to people from various countries and sectors, and also including small businesses and minorities as well. So in short, this tool should not simply add to the digital divide that already exists. What else? We've also got the issue of the consumption of energy, and Professor Kelly Whitty went into some of this already. There will be a high amount of energy usage happening in terms of generating that unprecedented volume of data that's going to be needed to prepare and use digital twins. So this is problematic in the first sense because, it's not going to be done all on renewable energy. We don't have that capacity yet. So it kind of defeats that just transition intention as well. So these are issues that also need to be grappled with and dealt with before we really think about how valuable DTs can be. Then, of course, there's this concept of this exclusive decision-making, which I said. So there's already a heavy reliance and expectation on DTs to be supporting decision-making. Now, we need to ensure that that tool is only just one of the considerations that's taken into account in policymaking, right? You need to be including the knowledge of Indigenous peoples, for instance, and local communities where it is relevant. So decisions should not be made solely on what the DT suggests, but the results of the tool's application can be an important factor in consideration. And it should be, because it can bring a lot of compilation of data to an important stage. This is critical for what I would say is a just application of the tool. The other issue that I raised is disclosure and transparency. Now, most government-led DTs, which are the ones that I spoke about, are publicly accessible. It's available to everyone. But some digital twins will be private to businesses. Now, what happens if an adverse consequence or impact comes up that has large environmental implications? Are they obligated to share that information? Is there a duty to disclose that which has come up? Well, no, unless there is something actually noted in the agreement that created the DT. So this is where a space where legal regulation is very much needed. Perhaps it's going to be a condition of being given access to the data that you must then make it accessible to folks. And then once there's a disclosure event occurs, who do you disclose it to? There's no pathway for it. Is it a regulation agency? Is it the government? Who do we go to? So there are a lot of unanswered questions at this stage of the tech. So DT can carry both potential and risk. Proponents of the tool must take care in how the tools are used, account for the legal risks that are involved, and ensure that unjust implications are not promoted through the use of the tool. And lawyers, I think, can help regulate the use of the tool, provided that these concerns are addressed. Now, this lends to some of the recent work that I've been doing with bar associations, particularly regarding the evolving role of the lawyer. And I think Justice Jawad Hassan mentioned this, made a brilliant segue to it early in the morning discussion for me. There is this increasing recognition that environmental challenges, including climate change, are no longer just the domain of environmental and energy lawyers. Let's face it, all lawyers have to be on board for this now. And other legal practices are already being affected. And you can see some of the areas where they're already being affected. I don't have time to go into them, but I'm happy to discuss them with you later. But the legal profession and what is expected of lawyers is also undergoing a transition. We're seeing the rise of approaches to lawyering that are grappling with the environmental challenges we face today. Now, some call it climate conscious lawyering, some call it climate competent lawyering, and others call it sustainability lawyering. Now, in 2021, we had John Kerry, who some of you might know, the former Secretary of State and the first United States Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, address the American Bar Association. I'm talking about the American Bar because it is the largest voluntary body of lawyers in the United States. And he made a very provocative statement to a very diverse set of lawyers that form the organization. You are all climate lawyers now, whether you want to be or not. So much of the legal work that is before the legal profession is related to climate change adaptation, but it will also be about climate change mitigation. So as countries aim to meet Paris Agreement goals, reducing emissions, the net zero targets, all of this will play a pivotal, and lawyers will have to play a pivotal role in shaping those laws to reduce the carbon pollution, to act on these issues, and also to determine what tools will drive decision-making, such as DTs, right? So lawyers will have a role to play here. And as you heard from previous speakers, scientists, architects, tech innovators, they're all working hard to produce a multitude of tools. And building off Dr. Lund's comments earlier, the role of lawyers and how lawyers need to look at these innovations and innovate our laws in response to the innovations that are coming. It has to be done thoughtfully because we want to accommodate the tools that are being put forward, but then also make sure that that accommodation happens in a just way. And so that is the hard balancing act that we have to accomplish. And I think lawyers are in a good place to be able to do that, provided they listen to the folks that are also that have expertise in the space. Now, you might call what I'm talking about climate conscious lawyer. So lawyers taking a more active and conscious approach towards how they go about their legal practice. The concept emerged in the seminal article by Chief Justice Brian Preston from Australia, where he described that a climate conscious approach requires a very active awareness of the reality of climate change and then how it interacts with daily legal problems. And so we've seen bar associations also promote this similar line of thinking. This is an ABA resolution that came out of 2019. It came out of the main policymaking body of the ABA. And it adopted a resolution recommending a transition to net zero emissions and encouraging lawyers to, hey, you must counsel your clients on the risks and opportunities that arise from climate change. But the resolution also called on the legal profession and the entire profession, to be exact, to advise their clients of the risks and opportunities that climate change provides. It then goes on. It tells them you have to engage in pro bono activities, reduce greenhouse gas to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's putting this pressure on the legal field to say you have now a duty and an expectation. They're not the only ones. So the International Bar Association, the global counterpart to the ABA, also adopted a similar statement, and this was called the Statement on the Climate Crisis, and it builds on the ABA resolution. And something that I think is really interesting is that the IBA statement also reminds us that lawyers represent influential figures and thought leaders in the space, and to live responsibly by reducing their own environmental footprint and in everyday actions, and by supporting positive changes in your workplace, adopting sustainability practices there, greater reliance on things like electronic file storage, facilities, digital technologies, which might be digital twins as a possibility, energy efficient offices, and so on. So there's a place where DTs could deliver what the IBA is calling for as well. 2 minutes? Okay. So what I'm going to show you now is a series of things that have come across in the last couple of years. So you see climate change policy that came out of the Law Council of Australia, a World Lawyers Pledge on climate action. Again, all of these associations of lawyers coming together to say the same thing. We need to do more in this profession. A Chancellor Lane project, which is where commercial lawyers have come together and said, these are draft provisions that you can use in your contractual agreements that relate to climate change. Now, imagine if we've already got a nice data set, but if we can expand on that, we can then use generative AI to perhaps create more options for folks. A net zero alignment strategy. So commercial law firms and lawyers have come together in this organization, where they promote different ways that those law firms can contribute to climate change action in a positive way. So what are, using particular provisions that are more just or more climate friendly and so forth, or sustainability minded, etc. And then providing an actual template for companies to follow through on. The last thing I want to focus on, and this kind of changes into climate competency. So we start questioning lawyers of, hey, if you have a duty to your client, you have to meet competency levels. That includes you being able to, advise relating to climate change. lots of guidance has come out. It's like each year I'm getting more and more that's coming through. This is from the Law Society of England and Wales right here. Brazilian bar also came up. And in specifically, they also asked for large companies, large law firms to commit to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. So it all goes through to like what are sustainable, what is being expected of the legal field. One thing I'm going to add that I do want to highlight is this, which comes to what Ambassador Jackson was talking about and the Bridgetown Initiative. So we're talking about lawyers becoming more climate just oriented and making sure that we're actually doing action and not just talking about it. So these are policies, but we can really go beyond this. This is something that just came out this past August out of the ABA, and it's our latest resolution. It builds on our earlier climate resolution, but here we are supporting developing states, and in particular, small island developing states, towards being able to access climate finance in a much more just fashion. And of course, we've specifically outlined the Bridgetown Initiative as one of those examples. So takeaways for the legal profession is that you need to be thinking about how, our legal profession has to change, and then what DT and other AI tools might have to say in how we go about it, but also what role can you play as a lawyer in making sure that those tools are being used by the community and the global community in a just fashion. And then in terms of what are the takeaways for our interdisciplinary colleagues, I'd say you should also look at what are the trends that are happening in your own profession. I am seeing it in health professions, in medical, engineering, architecture. All of these folks are also coming together in associations to promote climate action. And this is an area where I think we can also help support each other on building that profession out and using the professions itself as well as a driving force for climate justice. And so I'll end there. And I'm sorry, I went a little bit over.